Okay.
Okay, I'm going to, hold on a second. I'm gonna. Oh, here comes Terry. Yeah, okay. I think you're better. Okay, so we are
I'm
live.
on the telephone now.
Okay, we can hear you nice and clear. Okay, we are recording and we are live streaming in case anybody wants to watch. And we have a quorum, so I will continue to admit people as they log in, but we got a lot to cover today. And so I'm going to call the meeting to order at 4:03. In terms of the minutes, we did not approve the minutes from January and the February meeting because we did not have a quorum. So I'll take a motion if anybody wants to make that to approve the minutes from January.
Oh, all right. I'll second it.
Okay, Jen, did you get that? No?
Sharon, Joel has to turn off the audio on his computer because he's both on his computer and his phone. There you go.
Okay.
You won't get the reverb.
I turned it off.
Very
Okay,
good.
I turned it off.
Okay, no, you're good, Joel. Okay, so we have a motion by who? Somebody wave.
I think maybe I did.
Okay, Joel made a motion to approve the minutes from January 19th, seconded by
I'll second it. PJ. thank you.
PJ. All in favor? Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Great. Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved from January 19th. Again, February 16th, we sent with a copy of the meeting notes from last meeting, and so we're not going to adopt them formally. I don't think we need to. We're just going to post them as meeting notes because we didn't have a quorum for that meeting. So with that, I am going to turn it over to, let me just share my screen. I'm going to turn it over to Francisco, who's going to share some socioeconomic and demographic trends that they've been working on, and it's just really interesting. So buckle up. Go ahead, Francisco.
Okay, thanks everyone. It's good to see you all again. And let me know when you can see my screen.
Okay.
You're
Yep.
good.
Okay, great. So welcome to our 5th meeting. And thanks for taking the time to turn out for it. We can't do this without you. So it's really important that you continue to come to these monthly meetings. And I hope you find them informative. Our agenda today is our team has collected a bunch of demographic and socioeconomic data from multiple sources, and they're all listed there. We will also be pulling from some other sources as well. So this is well-sourced data, and we're going to give you an overview today of not only where Danbury is now, but where it's come from, mostly over the last 10 years, but in some cases further back, and potentially where it's headed with respect to some of these variables. We will then very briefly review the draft vision statement, which is evolving as we have input. Talk about launching our public campaign, which I know we've been talking about it for a couple of months, but we're very close. And then next steps. And as a heads up, I have to leave at 5:30. I have a wake to attend. So I'm going to try to get through this material in a timely manner while still affording us time for comment and discussion. So I'm going to review. We have the presentation organized in a series of topics. The first one being population. Once I get through all of these population slides, I'll pause. And if you have any questions on population or comments, let's talk about it then. And then I have about 5 other topics, and we'll pause as we get through each topic. And we have, anywhere from half dozen to dozen slides for each topic. Okay. All right, Danbury's population. I think, as you're probably all pretty well aware, it has grown fairly steadily, and it has done so for the last 50 years. And if we were to look back further, those trends are probably project all the way back to the turn of the century, 19th into the 20th, 19th and the 20th, that is. You're currently at just about 85,000, and you had a couple periods of slightly higher than average growth. And that was in the 70s and 90s, averaging 1.4% per year. You have, as a city, consistently outpaced both Fairfield County and Connecticut in population growth over the last 50 years. That being said, that gap is shrinking, and you're coming much closer in line with Fairfield County's growth. And Connecticut isn't showing up in that last column because it was just about flat. All right, so where is that growth occurring and where is it not occurring? And if we look back over the past 5 years, and this is comparing data that we collect, that the US Census Bureau collects on an annual basis. It's called American Community Survey. And that is done from a small sample size, which is why it doesn't get as much attention, unlike the US survey, which is trying to collect every household. That does a sample of households and through an algorithm is able to project what the trends are throughout a community. It's pretty accurate information, plus or minus, depending what you're looking at, a couple % accuracy. And the review period for most of this data, and we reference a lot of this data, so I want to explain it, is 2015 to 2019. So you take the past 5 years and then you average it to get where you're at. So that's why you see that date range. But what it means is the most up-to-date information based on the last few years versus 2010 survey, which is more than 10 years old now, that data. And we don't yet have the 2020 survey data. So when we compare American Community Survey data to the 2010 census, what we see is some population change in various age cohorts. And all the red bars are negative. That means you lost population, people over the age of 25, in their 30s, and people in their late 40s, early 50s. And you grew in all other areas. And the growth we see age 60, 55 plus is pretty consistent with Connecticut in that we're kind of an older state and a lot of our communities are getting older, and much of that's associated with the baby boom crest, just cresting through and getting older and older. And my generation, Generation X, people in their 40s, 30s, are underrepresented in Connecticut. And so that's exactly what we see here. But what we're looking at now is when we look down the road, 10, 15 years, 20 years, it's going to look a little different, and I'll explain why. Now, when we take a look at the age distribution, when we compare you to the county and the state, what we see is you're actually younger, and that's fairly typical of cities. Cities tend to be younger places. Depending on how people count the residency of some of your Western Connecticut residents, that might be factoring in, but you're younger than basically both Fairfield County and the state. So while, yes, you've got this big part of your population that's older and you've lost young people, you're still younger than the region. And here it is right here. It shows with the average age too. You're about 2 years younger than both Fairfield County and the state as a whole. Your population density, as expected, you're a city, so your population density is higher than the region and the state. But what I find interesting is you're not that much denser than Fairfield County, which includes a lot of smaller towns and mid-sized towns. And yes, it does have cities like Norwalk and Stamford that factor in, but you're not a real dense city. And I think when you look at your development patterns and the periods of growth where you had development, a lot of single family homes, that kind of explains things. A diverse city, you are a diverse city, and you're basically twice as diverse as both Fairfield County and the state in a lot of the metrics we measure diversity with, whether it's non-white population, foreign-born, or English proficiency. So I think you all sense that, but you are about twice as diverse in every metric. Now, when we take a look at population projections, and this is a big caveat because there's a lot of math that goes into these projections, and something like COVID can just throw a total monkey wrench into all of that math. So we don't know what the impacts of COVID are going to be on population for Danbury, for Fairfield County, for the state. We know the impact right now is a really hot housing market. With respect to long-term population, we don't know what that's going to be. As a whole, Connecticut's population is projected to be pretty flat, with all the cities gaining and almost all the towns losing. And these are projections that were done a few years ago. Were last updated in 2017. And what we see is Danbury continues that very steady growth trend. And we've worked in a lot of communities. We're just finished Monroe's Plan of Conservation Development, almost finished. And they're looking at a decline. And we're not sure that's going to really play out. But point being, when we take a look at your population, you're probably in a very good position. That being changed, the demographics of that population are going to start to change. So when we break out those projections by age, and we also compare you here to Fairfield County, what we see is everything below the line, of course, is negative, is population loss. And everything pointing up is gain. And you're gaining most of that population in your younger folks, exactly the population where you have a deficit right now. So that's the good news. Looking out, it looks like the natural trends are going to help you round out those family age, parent age adults. And so you have the beginnings of that population developing in your younger, in your children, your younger adults, your students, that if you can retain those people and keep them in town, they're going to fill that. Now, where you're starting to lose population are those baby boomers that are starting to age out. And when I say age out, they're moving out of town for other types of housing, whether it's Florida or assisted living facility you don't have, or they're leaving the big world, right? So that's what we're looking at here. And so what this suggests is that these cycles are just waves and they're going to continue, but the city has a really good opportunity now to make sure you can capture that wave of younger adults who are going to be naturally moving into those age cohorts. Some of this is based on migration, but most of it's based on birth rate and the number of kids you have in your schools. And when we take a look at those trends, comparing it to both Fairfield County and the state, we see what I talked about earlier. It's really positive for Danbury, neutral for Connecticut, and actually down for Fairfield County because all the towns bring it down. And the question is that really going to play out? And is COVID going to reverse some of these trends? And what are the implications for Danbury? So I'm going to take a break here. And I'm happy to answer any or receive any comments you have, answer any questions.
I'd like to ask a question here. Since we're so close to having the 2020 census numbers, are we going to step back and at least look to see if there's some significant changes or differentials in the actual census versus these projections you're using?
Yes, absolutely. And we're actually, it's going to be a little while before we have 2020 census data at the city level. It'll first be issued at a national level, then the state level. They'll trickle down to the geographies. It's going to be, and the census is a bit of a mess for this this past reporting period. But to answer your question, yes, we're going to be working on this plan for another year plus. And before we finalize the POCD, we want to look back, update all of our demographics with the most recent data available. And even the American Community Survey is going to start releasing up to 2019 or 2020 data very shortly. So yes.
Hi, Francisco. This is Vinny. How are you?
Hi, Vinny.
Hi. I have a quick question. So obviously all of those population findings are there and all the trends and the charts. Now,
Right.
You guys have done this for a long time with other communities. When you see those type of projections, then you build a plan, and then hindsight's always 2020. Do you ever do like will you be making recommendations based upon plans that you've built to address these, and then what actually happened years later to kind of give us some insight into what the best thing is based upon maybe some other people's mistakes?
Yeah, that's a great question you ask. And if you're doing an academic study, that's exactly how you would do it, right? Unfortunately, we don't have it unless we work with a community 10 years from now to do another POCD. We don't have too many opportunities to look back and see where things actually wound up versus where we thought they were going to be. Now, but I think your question gets to a very important point, is how do we use this information? How much value do we place upon it? And I think my response to that would be, we're not going to be making any major decisions based upon one metric. Right? We're not going to set policy because we had one projection. But we want to, in this process, gather up as much information as possible so we can make informed policy recommendations and goals and strategies for this plan. And we're going to balance what we find with this information with discussions with lots of people about what we think the reasonable course of action is going to be for Danbury, whether it's the big policy goals or little actionable items.
Oh, thank you.
Anybody
Anyone
else? Okay, let's move.
Okay, I'll keep going because we have a lot more. All right, education. And let me make sure I didn't skip a slide. No, I didn't. Okay. You have, and this is pretty common of cities in Connecticut, where you have a greater share of people kind of right in the middle of educational attainment. And that is high school graduate, you're real high with, and that means high school graduate alone, right? Whenever we take a look at one of these categories, that means that's where people stopped, is what we're looking at. So you're higher because you have a lot of people, that's where they stop their educational attainment. And you're lower on the bachelor's and higher degree end, graduate degree, PhD, doctors, lawyers, etc. This is pretty common of a city, particularly in Connecticut, or any city for that matter. When you look at the city as a whole, right? If you look at New York, yeah, if you just look at Manhattan, it's going to look a little different than the entire city. But if you look at the entire city, it probably has a very similar profile to this. So that's not unexpected. But I think that the encouraging news is when we take a look at the trends, you're shifting towards higher education, more people with a higher education. So you've, over the past decade, you've increased the number of residents with bachelor's degrees, with graduate degrees, and you're about the same with graduates, but you have far fewer people that didn't finish high school. So these are all pretty good trends. And for those people that didn't finish high school, that part of that, yes, is Danbury Public Schools. But remember, this is migration of people into the community as well from a lot of other educational backgrounds. And when we take a look at education, you're very well represented in people and of your students. You have a lot of students in college or graduate school, and of course, Western Connecticut's a really big part of that. Outside of that, the distribution here is kind of what you would expect to see. Your enrollment of Danbury Public Schools has grown, with the exception of this past year, and this could very well be a COVID asterisk. It grew steadily year over year, an average rate of 1.1%. However, if you remember, your population grew at 1.4%, right? So what explains the difference, 1.4 and 1.1? And that's basically people are having less kids, is what it comes down to.
Say that again, please.
Yeah, so what we see is your population has grown at an average rate of 1.4% per year, yet your school enrollment has only grown 1.1% per year. And part of that explanation is people are having less kids, people are waiting later in life to have kids. Part of it could be private school, higher private school enrollment. We do have some stats on that. I haven't looked into that as a variable here. But your schools are growing. That's the most important piece of information, because a lot of communities in Connecticut have schools that are shrinking. And this is a very important part of capital planning do you have capacity to accommodate those children? And the school district did a study on this in 2019, which we pulled data from. And we'll get into that as we go further along in the process of planning. The enrollment projections that came out of that study are also positive, looking out the next 5 years. So we don't see any reason for it to dip. And there's also once again, the question of what's the impact that COVID is going to have on school enrollment. Is there a migration effect into Danbury? Is there an effect of people that left the system during the pandemic that won't return? We don't yet know that. Okay. Any questions on education findings? No? All right.
I have one, actually.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead first, whoever that was.
Yes, with these numbers that you have shown us here on the education, were any of the numbers attained through the Danbury Public Schools as far as the education department?
They were attained from Connecticut, the state of Connecticut, which has a repository of all school data. And the enrollment numbers were obtained from the study the school district did. The rest of it was from both American Community Survey, the educational attainment, and we pulled data from the state of Connecticut as well.
Thank you.
My question was, when you look at that trend that we have a higher percentage of college or graduate or folks who have finished college or graduate school.
I'll go back to it.
How does that compare nationally? Are more people going to college overall? Or,
yeah, you are benefiting from that trend nationally. Oh, so you're not bucking any trends that are happening in the state or nationally. It's something that's happening everywhere. But the good news is you're not falling behind. So right, that's not unique to Danbury. You're not like really out competing the rest of Connecticut cities in this trend.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll keep going. All right. Let's talk about your households. Your city. In the census data, we break it down into smaller and smaller geographies, and the household is the smallest geography. So we start with the city as a whole, then we go to zip codes, and then census tract, and then census block groups that are smaller than a tract, and then down to a household, and that's the smallest unit of measure. And so that can give us really the most interesting information. Your average household size is larger than both Fairfield County and the state at 2.82. This is still down historically. If we were to look back over the last 50 years, it would have been just shrinking the entire time. So we would have been down to 2.82. Your family versus non-family households. This is something that's changing over time too, with far more non-family households now than 50 years ago. I think everyone is probably pretty well aware of how our households are changing. And as is common with most cities, you have a higher share of non-family households. You have people that are roommates and boarding and all kinds of arrangements, and a lower share of family households than both Fairfield County and Connecticut, but not that far behind. And I think a lot of that goes back to the type of housing that you have, and we'll talk about that in the next section. Same residence as 1 year prior or transiency. You're not a very transient community. 85% is a real high retainage for people that are in the same household or same house they were a year ago. And you're not far behind Fairfield County or the state. So what does that mean? Well, part of it is that, hey, you're a stable community. People like the city and they stay, and they have good housing. They stay in their housing. But the other part of that may be that, well, maybe there's really not enough migration into the community. Maybe there's not enough opportunity for migration. Maybe there's not enough housing choice that's creating some churn. When we think of really healthy communities, let's say something in Greater Boston, or very close to Boston, it's going to have a lot of that churn. Much of that's related to the universities and to jobs and professionals, and it's a regional draw, so there's a lot more turnover. That, and you have a fairly high home ownership rate, and so those people stay put. Median household income is pretty close to on par with the state, and ahead of a lot of Connecticut cities, much further ahead than Hartford or Bridgeport. Of course, Fairfield County is a bit of an anomaly, and so it stands out. But your median household income is pretty good at $73,000 and change. And when we take a look at how that's distributed, that's the median, that's the middle point. And taking a look at how that's distributed is interesting, because you have plenty of people at the real upper thresholds of income, right? 200,000 or more, or households, I should say, not people. There's a pretty good share of people there, but obviously Fairfield County has a lot of people or households above that income level. And then you're fairly well represented throughout the middle, but you're just not real strong in those middle groups, 50,000 to 50,000 plus. Whereas you have a lot more people below 50,000, and that's probably not too surprising for a city. Okay, any questions about the household data we're looking at? And once again, with all this data, I like to say to my staff when I see data is, so what, right? And I think that's the question we need to answer is going to be, so what, right? We have all these findings. So what does it mean? So what do we do? And we're not going to have that figured out all at once. But I think throughout this process, throughout the next year plus, we're going to go back to some of this information, and we're going to see we're going to figure out what the implications of it are and see how it can support what it is that we're beginning to discover that we need to do or you need to do as a community. All right. Now let's talk about the housing itself. So the household are the people living in a housing unit, and the housing is the physical housing. And Danbury has 42% of your housing is single family detached, which is relatively high for a city, but you can see that it's much lower than Fairfield County or Connecticut, both of which are mostly comprised of towns that are almost exclusively single family detached housing. And when we take a look at your housing type, what we see is outside of that 42% single family, a fairly evenly distributed housing type. One unit attached, that would be a condominium or a townhouse. 2 units, a duplex or a 2-family. 3 or 4 units, once again, could be a multifamily, 3-4 family. And then apartment buildings and complexes, right, above 5 units. And so there's a decent amount of diversity amongst the housing type that you do have. And a lot of those apartment units are your older units, and the single family are your younger units. And we'll take a look at that in a moment right here. All right, about half of your housing stock is less than 50 years old, and half is more than 50 years old. And the 40-year period in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s saw the construction of more than half of that. Right, it was all sandwiched in a good part of your housing stock in that period, and those are the biggest pieces of the pie, right through the middle. Things have obviously slowed down over the 2010 period. There was a pretty significant lag effect from the 2008 housing bust into Connecticut. It showed up here much later, and so there was a lag. That being said, as we'll see in a moment, you had a lot of activity or permits issued in the early 2010s. So here it is right here. 2011 still kind of slow from the 2008 fallout, and then a very intense activity 2012 through 2015. Now these are housing permits for units that this doesn't guarantee that all of these units actually were built and came online. Usually it's a very high percentage. So there could be some discrepancy there between what was actually built and given a CO, certificate of occupancy, and what was permitted. Point being, since 2016, that activity has really fallen off. It has been quite low. And I suspect a lot of that 2012, 2015 activity were much larger developments, apartments, condos, that sort of thing. Sharon, does this look familiar to you, that the way that activity laid out here over the timeline?
Yes, I was going to just wait till you got to the end of this and just go back to the slide, but I'll just comment on it now. So 2015, the 551, I mean, Kennedy Flats is in there, it's 300 units. Yeah. And then in the prior years, I think, the various developments up at the reserve came online. And I'm trying to think of anything else that was big. Those are the 2 things that jump out. The 2015 numbers, definitely Kennedy Flats. And but yeah, then it would take it back down to kind of sort of on average. And Timber Oaks is in there somewhere too, whether it's 2015. But yeah, we've had some, some complexes, but a portion of it is the build out at the reserve, portion of the build out at the reserve, and then the big development down at Kennedy Flats.
Okay. These are very big numbers. Even the numbers you're looking at over the past few years, 100 plus, are big numbers for a community of about 85,000 people. I mean, we work in communities of 20, 30, 40,000 people that have a dozen. So these are, regardless, this is a lot of activity. It's just compared to prior decades, it's not quite as much. All right, when we take a look at your home ownership rate, we see it's pretty high for a city at 58%, and less than 10% behind the county and the state. Much of that correlates to your housing stock, the type of housing that you have. You have a lot of single family at 42% single family. But it also suggests you have a lot of non-single family housing that's available for purchase, for ownership, whether it be condos or duplexes and other types of ownership arrangements, which is good. You want to have ownership. Ownership is equity. Ownership is is roots in a community. These are all good numbers. The median home value is, of course, Fairfield County, with all the coastal towns and towns like McCain, skews everything. But these are pretty high numbers, higher than the state as an average at almost 300,000 for median ownership value. And in this past year, that number, if you were to take a look at the actual sales figures, it's probably well above that as well. And when we take a look at, well, what kind of housing do you have where, how much $500,000 housing, how much $200,000 housing? Most 42% of your housing shows up in the $300,000 to $500,000 range, right? That's the bulk of it, which much of that is still out of range for a lot of your population. You do fortunately have about half of your housing is less than 300,000, and with housing that's in a more affordable range, the lower you go on that spectrum. Even though you have a healthy share of housing that's what we would consider to be affordable, as we get into the affordability measures, what we're going to see is people still struggle to afford housing. So when we take a look at ownership cost as a percentage of income of homes with a mortgage, so you have a mortgage, you're paying your mortgage, your insurance, your taxes, and I believe utilities is included in this. And what we see is 27% are paying 35% or more of their income for that housing. Another 10% more than 30. Anything more than 30% is considered housing cost burden. That means you're struggling to stay in your housing, in your home, and that's a pretty high number. Even when we look at homes without a mortgage, right? You're free and clear. You still have 19% of people that are housing cost burden. That is more than 30% of their income is going to staying in their home. And a good part of this are retirees, fixed income retirees that they still have to pay taxes, insurance, and upkeep of the home. And that's why a good share of their income is going towards that. I think if there's anything coming out of this data, it's that affordability of housing will continue to be an issue. It's an issue for every community, and Danbury is no exception. And the plan really needs to be focused on that. And in addition, the city is going to be doing an affordable housing plan that will be a supplement of this plan, or will complement it, and will enable us to really dive deep into this issue. As I mentioned, you have a fairly high ratio of people that own their homes, with 42% owner or renter occupied. And the median gross rents are pretty high, very close to Fairfield County. And when we think about places like Stamford and Norwalk and other places that are pretty pricey, on the main line of Metro North, that number may be a little surprising. And part of that could be related to a lot of the development activity that you did have in the early 2010s, with that being all new market rate development, and those rental costs have to be high to cover the costs because those developments aren't paid for yet. Someone's still paying them off. As housing tends to get older, rental costs come down. And so this may have to do with your portfolio of housing and when it was built, and maybe the type that you have. But those numbers are high. That means there's a pretty high barrier to entry into Danbury. If you're a young person looking to get started there, you're not real competitive to Fairfield County with respect to your offerings and price points. And the gross monthly rent, you have a pretty high share of really expensive rental housing. Up above 2,000, you have about 15%, and so that's these are pretty big numbers. And part of that could be because you have a lot of single-family housing stock. It could be that a lot of your rentals are single-family houses, which tend to command a lot more on a monthly rent than a two-bedroom apartment. And when we take a look at renters too, an even greater percentage of renters are housing cost burden, and that number is actually 55%, because it's over 30% of your housing costs. So we need to add the 45 and the 10. So 55%, or more than half of your renters, are barely making it. That's a challenge. And of course, when we take a look at your monthly rent cost, it's no reason, right? No wonder that's the reason. Resident tenure in housing, you have a very even distribution here. 26% moved into housing since 2015, and it goes further back. And this relates back to the transiency I talked about. People are staying in their housing for a fairly long time here, and you have very high percentage of people in the same house they were in last year. And affordable housing. This is state qualified or defined affordable housing, which is a very strict formula. It's Section 8, of course. It's certain federally backed mortgages. It's other rental assistance programs. It is housing authority properties. And the state set a goal for all communities at 10%. You're safely above that. Statewide average right now is currently around 6%.
Can I just jump in for one second?
Please
so
do.
Everybody knows. So they just on March 1st released, so they're a year behind on the appeals list, which is where this percentage number comes from. And we count the affordable units, and it consists of a variety of types of units, as Francisco said. So as of March 1st, 2021, the 2020 list was out and we were at 12%.
Okay, so you gained just a little bit.
Right.
It's the right direction, Sharon, do you have any idea what attributes to basically a more than 1% bump over the last 2 years?
There has been an increase in the Chaffin mortgages and the tenant voucher, which are government assisted units through HACD. So there's more vouchers and people, through the housing authority obtaining vouchers or in a RAP program or one of the programs that they run. I wouldn't say there's been a significant at all increase in the number of deed restricted units.
Right.
So it's the Chaffin mortgages and the governmentally assisted units.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So when we compare Danbury to both Fairfield County and the state with respect to these housing burden households, what we actually see is you're quite comparable. Even though those numbers are pretty high, it's very much in line with both Fairfield County and a little higher than the state as well, which just because you're in line with Fairfield County and the state doesn't mean that this is not an issue. And the affordability of housing is a huge issue for Connecticut, particularly when Connecticut struggles with population stagnation or loss. All right, questions, comments about our housing findings?
Observation or question? I'm not sure which way this is going.
Sure.
All of this housing data about percentages and affordabilities, and I heard a lot of maybes why we don't know real, there's a lot of speculation, adjectives and adverbs used in that presentation. And I'm not sure how that helps us in developing a forward-looking plan. Just saying this is what it is, but without knowing why it is, I'm not sure it gives us much of a basis to make intelligent decisions on going forward.
Yeah, so you're right. Is it a question or is it a comment?
Yeah, it's more of an observation of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, well, let's turn it into a question. And so what I will say is there are a lot of different directions we could go right now. We're at the very beginning, and we're starting to see these interesting things based upon the work that we've done to date at month 4 in the process. And as we start to meet with people and get feedback from people, we're going to start to hear from people that these are the real issues that we are experiencing. And why is that? And we'll have more direction. And then we can dive deeper and more focused into answering those questions why. And I don't have the answers yet. I'm pointing to the work that needs to be done, which is why my language is caveating things.
So kind of be patient, it's coming, huh?
Yeah, well, in some cases, we won't be able to answer some of these questions. We will have to speculate because the information just isn't available. But we're going to try to pull in what we know from various sources and studies that were done and what's happening nationally. We're going to make an informed and educated decision about what it means and why it's happening and what we need to do. And in other cases, we're just going to find that information and it will answer some of those questions for us, and we can be more definitive in how we talk about these things going forward.
This is Arnie. I'd just like to make a comment. The more I think about this affordable housing issue, the more I realize it's really kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, for any given community, you want prices to go up. That's a good thing. That's a sign of a vibrant economy. It's a sign of a desirable place to live. And the alternative to that is plunging housing prices, and nobody wants that. That's not a good sign of a community. That's not going to induce businesses to come to Danbury or people to move to Danbury. So the idea that housing prices go up is a good thing. However, I guess if they go too high, you price yourself out of various markets. The kids that grow up in Danbury can't afford a house, so they have to move. So it's really there's sort of a tipping point there, I guess, between affordable housing prices going up and them going up too much to have a negative impact. I don't know how you balance that whole thing out.
Well, the key word there, Arnie, is balance, and it is about balance. And a very important part of the equation is reinvestment. So reinvestment in terms of maintaining the housing stock that you have and keeping housing stock online. In any given year, there's an attrition of about 0.5% in the average city of housing stock. It burns down, it falls into disrepair, it's abandoned, it's foreclosed, it's torn down, whatever it may be. So there's attrition, and it's all of it's depreciating year after year on its own. So you need reinvestment to maintain value, and you need new units to come online because the new units will provide the quality housing and much of it at the upper price range. But it's a supply and demand equation. If you're bringing new units online, there's going to be a little less demand for the older, less expensive units and more available to the market. And so the question is, whether or not you're adequately replacing units, adding new units to match up with the population growth that you're experiencing. The other part of the equation is housing cost burden. You can look at it from two lenses. You can look at it through the cost of housing lens, or you can look at it through the income lens. And the other way to reduce housing cost burden is to improve incomes. And you do that by making sure your economy is strong. You have jobs to offer. You have good jobs to offer. And that's the next thing we're going to talk about is jobs and economy.
Can I add to that housing cost burden? I understand about raising income and being able to afford housing. Is there any data to be compared to or can be acquired to also bring into factor that the 2007 to 2009 housing market crash could have taken an effect on how banks lend to people nowadays compared to 10 12 years ago, because I'm all for people having better income and being able to afford. I just want to know if there's anything that we can compare or gain to compare that to what is happening now with the study that you showed us.
Yeah, absolutely. So access to capital, right? Access to the real estate market for home ownership opportunities is a really important part of this. And the barriers are very often higher in cities that are more diverse and more economically challenged. We are going to get further into that, and much of that work is going to be done through the Affordable Housing Plan, which is going to be a parallel process to this POCD. That's going to take a deeper dive into, what are the barriers, and are there barriers related to access to mortgages? But yeah, that's a really important piece of this. And we will be looking further into it, whether it's through the POCD itself or the Affordable Housing Plan. And let me just take a step back right now. And Sharon, do you want to give them a little update on the Affordable Housing Plan? I've been talking about it.
Yeah, sure. I just unmuted myself because I was going to just butt in. We're required by state statutes, as are 169 communities, to prepare an affordable housing plan every 5 years. That statute was approved a couple of years ago and kind of was put on hold, and DOH, the Department of Housing, was trying to figure out how to write the right guidance on what these plans should include. Net, they just released guidance in 2020. A very small handful of communities around the state prepared a plan with no guidance and got them approved through their, or endorsed locally, and that's fine. We determined that we needed to wait until we got some guidance. We had been talking to DOH over the last year and a half, I would say. Anyway, fast forward December, they put out the guidance, and the communities are supposed to have this affordable housing plan under 8-30J of the Connecticut General Statutes done by next July. So what the city has done is we've engaged FHI because of a majority of the work that goes into the preparing the data and doing the data analysis for the affordable housing plan is being done as part of the POCD. It made sense, and it was economies to have FHI prepare the affordable housing plan for us. So we've engaged them separately on another task, which, as Francisco said, is kind of the deep dive into the affordable housing issues, but they are also running kind of parallel, because the recommendations of that plan will likely be the recommendations in the housing section of the POCD. So again, we're running them kind of parallel, but sped up a little on the affordable housing plan, just because we're statutorily required to do that. So that's why I don't mean to be confusing, but that's what that's about.
Thanks, Sharon.
Okay.
And any other questions or comments about the housing findings?
Just for me, sorry, Joel.
Barry, go ahead.
Just for me, that the biggest takeaway so far is that we have, a lot of young people about to become young adults, and we don't have affordable housing for those young people. Something we got to solve, I guess.
Okay, thanks, Barry. Joel?
Just food for thought, and you may be addressing this in the next part of this presentation having to do with the employment.
Yeah.
Danbury has, for a number of years, been blessed with the lowest unemployment rate in the state. And I'm wondering, in the old supply and demand, that more working people, is that, and more expendable income for whatever, is that partially the reason that might be our cost of housing has been being driven up?
Yeah, it could be. It could be that you're attracting people because you have jobs. The unemployment rate is based on residents. So those residents have jobs in Danbury and other places, and I'll go through that momentarily. So the question is, what is driving it? And it's all demand side versus supply. And where is that demand coming from? Well, you're on a Metro North line. That's huge plus. You're 84. Your commuting distance to New York City, to a lot of other, couple other metropolitan regions. So you're in the right place, and that's what's driving the demand. But it may be that your housing growth and reinvestment is not keeping pace with the population growth and the demand you're experiencing. And I'm sorry for saying maybe there. I know you want to hear.
Permissible, very permissible.
Okay, so let's get into that. I do have some data on that. So let's talk about where your residents work. And most of them work in Danbury. And that's the light blue there is 2009, the dark blue is 2018. And even more work in Danbury now than 2018. Part of that, or 29. A big part of that is you just have more jobs now everywhere. So more people working in Stamford than in 2009, but the distribution is pretty even. After Danbury, it's Stamford, New York City, Norwalk, Ridgefield, etc. Even as far out as Hartford, Waterbury. But your major employments are for your own residents. So people choose not only to work in Danbury, they choose to live there. And what comes first is, I know you'd like to have an answer from me on that right now. Do people move there and like it and decide to find a job close to home? Or do they get a job there and decide to move there because they like it? But that's a really high ratio that is not common of that many places. Distance to work. People from Danbury like to are willing to commute, and a big part of this is, I mentioned before, is Metro North and 84. Right, you're in striking distance of New York City and Hartford and Stamford and all these other places. So people are commuting, are doing those longer trips, 25 to 50 miles, and a little less are doing the short trips. Even though you have a lot of people that work right in Danbury. The job trends. Jobs in the city are actually down over the last 10 years when we take a look at the trends. Jobs held by workers residing in the city is up. So you have fewer jobs in the city, but a lot more workers living in the city. Okay, and we'll get further into that. And that's over 10 years and 5-year increments there. Unemployment rate, and this is of your residents, people who live whether or not they're employed or not. Danbury's the orange line at the bottom. And you can see Danbury's lower than both the state and the county. And the way the data is collected here, the state and the county, it shows us far more seasonal fluctuations, and it's in the reporting of the data. The point is, and to Joel's earlier point, you're much lower, and then we could all see what happened with COVID, right? And just before COVID, you were at your lowest level since September of 2001. And of course, we remember what happened that month to the economy. The rate is currently at 6.9%. That's as of last month. So you've recovered a lot since earlier last year, but you're not back to anywhere near back to 2.7%, which it was March 1st of last year. But that's a pretty incredible trend line. It's starting in 2010, just almost consistently lower and lower and lower. You were doing really well. You know, as a state, we were doing pretty well, and as a nation, for that matter. Okay, I do have a whole nother segment on the economy itself. This was specific to jobs and workers. So any questions or comments about that? Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, so where are some of those jobs? And when we take a look at the types of businesses that you have in Danbury and as compared to Fairfield County, what we see is you have a greater share of business establishments, and this is the number of businesses or share of businesses. You have a greater share than Fairfield County in professional, scientific, and technical services. That's all one group, one category, and that is right in the middle of the chart there. Entertainment and recreation, that's another category. Educational services, finance and insurance, information, and unclassified establishments. And that's a wide spectrum of things that fit in that basket. But you lag also construction as well. You lag, I'm sorry, you lag Fairfield County in those categories. You're stronger than Fairfield County in construction, retail, and other services. Right? So you have a different profile. The higher tech jobs, you lag Fairfield County in, and some of the lower wage jobs, the lower education job, retail, trade, construction, you're higher than. And your retail trade numbers are really strong, and a big part of that is Danbury Fair Mall. When we take a look at how your retail establishments are distributed, you have a very wide array of retail. You're not hemmed into any narrow particular retail segment. Clothing and accessories is the big one, and Danbury Fair Mall is a big part of that, and a pretty even distribution of other types of retailers. This is a really interesting chart. This is called a surplus leakage analysis, and surplus is anything, this is based on dollars of sales and purchases. So the dollars of sales in the city versus the purchases made annually by residents in the city, and you compare the two. And what you're seeing is you sell way more dollars worth of stuff than your residents purchase in all of these retail categories, and pretty big differences. So you are definitely the center of the region with respect to retail commerce. Those dollars are coming in, those sales are happening, and those purchases are going out, they're leaving. So you're doing really strong in this area, and the mall's part of that. Some of your other areas of commerce are a big part of that. It's rare though that I see a community where in every single category you're in surplus. You're selling more than your residents would ever need to buy. And what this implies is transportation and access is really important to all of these businesses, to all these retailers. If transportation to Danbury, because of traffic congestion or whatever form of transit, bus, rail, it becomes more congested, more time consuming, those businesses don't have enough local purchasing demand or power to absorb all those sales. Okay. Resident employment by industry. Now, the prior chart we looked at similar to this was your business establishments. Now we're taking a look at your residents and what they're employed in. And what we see is, in Danbury's the orange bar, Fairfield County's the dark blue, and Connecticut is the light blue, is that, to no surprise, you're stronger in the retail trade. You have a lot of residents employed in the retail trade, and that's because you have a lot of retailers in town. You're stronger in construction, and that's because you have a lot of construction establishments, in manufacturing as well. But you do lag in educational services and healthcare and social assistance, even though you're a city where a lot of those jobs tend to be located. So that's a really interesting statistic. You lag in some of the higher end jobs, right? Professional, scientific, finance, insurance, and real estate as well. When I say lag, I mean less than, you have a share that's less than both Fairfield County and the state.
Yeah, Francisco, I'm surprised to see with regard to healthcare, given that we have Danbury Hospital, a regional hospital, right smack in the middle of town. I was surprised to see that.
I was too. But you know what? There's a lot of hospitals in Fairfield County, and a lot of hospitals across the state as well.
Right.
So once again, I mean, if there are areas like this that we really think don't make sense, we could dig into those numbers a little bit to figure out what the story is. All right. And when we compare the share of jobs to Fairfield County, what we see is you actually have more jobs by industry in Fairfield County, in Danbury, than Fairfield County. So this is resident employment by industry, okay? This is jobs by industry, and the difference is jobs are something that's located in the city. Resident employment is your residents that live in town. What do they do for a living? So Arnie, part of the answer to your question may be that, yeah, you have Danbury Hospital, but not a lot of those people are living in the city, right? Those doctors are taking they're living outside. So I think that probably explains that. And sorry for not making that distinction.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and you can see it when that was PJ too, jumping in, but you can see it when you look at the next slide, when you flip the slide.
So here you have the jobs compared to Fairfield County. You have, of course, retail trade as well. So Danbury is really attractive to people that work in the retail trade. They tend to live in Danbury. But your healthcare, the jobs you have in healthcare, those people tend to live outside of Danbury.
Got it.
And that goes back to the income disparities. You have more lower wage residents, and a lot of the higher income earners are living outside the city. In other areas, accommodation and food services typically fall in line with retail, pretty similar. You have more restaurants. Manufacturing, you have more manufacturing jobs. Once again, you have fewer jobs in professional, scientific, and technical, and fewer in finance, insurance, and information as well. So you have fewer residents that work in those fields. You offer fewer jobs in those fields. The one way to approach this, if you're developing a plan, well, if you want more residents that do that type of work because they're higher income and they have something to contribute to the community, well, how do you get those jobs here? It's hand in glove.
Education.
And so that was the comparison to Fairfield County. And when we take a look at the actual employment numbers just for Danbury, what we see is even though when we take a look at your residents, even though I'm going back to this slide to point out an important difference, even though you lag Fairfield County in the number of residents who are employed in the healthcare sector, as we can see in this slide, and the state for that matter. When we go back to your resident employment, you have the greatest share of your residents are actually employed in the healthcare sector. So you are strong in resident employment in that sector, but not as high as Fairfield County or the state. And next to that is retail, followed by accommodation, food services, manufacturing, education, etc. Now, how have things changed? And Richard, if you have a question, we'll come back to you just in a minute once I get through these. So how are things changing? How are they trending? Between 2008, 2018, and I don't want you to be too distracted by mining and quarrying, because while that's a big loss, it's actually, you have a very small number of jobs in that category, like under 100. And it's got to be related to the quarry. You have a quarry in the city, correct? An O&G quarry. Is that correct, Sharon?
Yeah.
So most of those jobs would be at O&G, right? I don't believe you have any oil wells in the city. So I don't want to be too distracted by that, because it's a tiny number, and loss of a little bit can be a lot. But if you look at information and manufacturing, where you offer a lot more jobs, you have losses in those areas, as well as finance and insurance. And so in these areas that are otherwise you might think are pretty attractive, you experience losses of residents employed in those industries. So this is resident employment, and I said jobs earlier, but not to confuse the two. Residents employed in those industries. But look at all the areas where you gained. More residents employed in public administration, more in accommodation and food services, more in arts and rec, more in administrative support, more actually in professional, scientific, and technical, more in retail, wholesale, agriculture, tiny numbers in that too, even though a big share of gains. A lot of that's related back to your unemployment levels being lower and the economy being stronger. So, the rising tide is lifting all boats here. But you grew in a lot of sectors, and I think if there's anything to pay attention to here and try to answer the question why did you experience losses in the areas that you did, even though the economy was growing and your unemployment rate was declining over that period? Okay.
Francisco, this is
Yep.
This is Vinny. I think one of the reasons to consider in the loss in finance, insurance, information, manufacturing, it's kind of the tale of two cities. It's a strength on our access to the highways and things. But in these areas, it could be looked at as a weakness because there's a lot of competition in New York and down county in those markets, and people have easy way of getting there, and kind of going elsewhere for that work.
That's an excellent point. And what we saw over that 10 years was a huge migration into New York City. And New York City building out millions of square feet of office space, and almost pulling Aetna down from Hartford, and pulling a lot of businesses. So yeah, it very much correlates with that. If you look at Fairfield, GE losing, or Fairfield losing GE to Boston, right. Question is, what's going to happen as a result of COVID? Are maybe companies going to start to move back because their staff is working from home? Do we start to count those that resident employment? Is there a migration impact on resident employment? Are you going to have a lot of people moving in from New York or greater New York, bringing those jobs with them? That, maybe we'll by the time we're done with this POCD, maybe we'll have some insight into that.
Question.
All right.
Could I ask my question?
Yeah, go ahead, Richard. Yeah, sorry for making you wait before.
Another concern I have, and I think you hit on it with particularly the COVID issue, is we're strong in the retail segment, and many of our slides indicate that. And it just seems with the onslaught of retail COVID, much of the retail has dropped, and so much has gone to online. And I don't think the horizon for brick and mortar retail, and particularly the mall, is that favorable or that good. Knowing that represents a lot to Danbury, I mean, should we be concerned about, what to do there, or how that would impact us both on a, financial as well as an employment situation?
Absolutely. These were trends that were already occurring, and this past year has exacerbated them. And I think going into this effort, we expected that the Danbury Fair Mall would receive attention from the plan. Just to think about what the future of that facility, of what that property looks like. And we know coming out of this year, there's going to be casualties. There are going to be, when we go back to the number of business establishments, those numbers, when they're finally reported, we'll see that impact. So yes, this should be a special area of focus for the plan.
Yeah. And that could have a trickle down effect too on, maybe other industries as well, in terms of the food service industry, and the inability to, because of lack of income and employment, perhaps the inability to then sustain a reasonably good economy in the other areas. So I think it's something that we've got to watch and take into account very seriously.
Very, very much so. Thank you for making that point. Okay. The jobs you have in Danbury versus neighboring towns, and of course, as the regional center, you have a lot more jobs than the surrounding communities. Now, these also include jobs from home. So when we think of jobs, we usually think, we think of an office or any other type of business. These are also jobs from home, wherever people report as their place of business. So people that work from their home, and we know it's going to change a lot because of this year. But you have a lot of jobs that are identified as being in Danbury. And when we compare that on a per capita basis to the surrounding towns, you're still strong. Even per capita, you have a lot of jobs. So you're a regional job center in addition to a retail center. Okay. This was our last area of focus. So any questions or comments on that?
No, I think we're good, Francisco.
Okay. All right. Well, let's revisit the vision statement. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll call your attention to the line in red. And we had a recommendation that we include within the vision statement the importance of partnerships with other institutions and organizations. So there it is. And if anyone has thoughts otherwise, please speak now, or well, I guess not forever hold your peace, but hold your peace for the next month. Like it, thumbs up, so. Thumbs up. I'm seeing some thumbs up. At least one.
Looking good.
Two,
This
3, 4.
point.
Helen has 2. Oh, I wonder.
Oh, good. I was just going to ask Helen. Yeah.
Wonder why Helen has 2. She really likes it. Unmute, Helen. Go ahead. We still can't hear you. There you are.
Because you included businesses as a focal point in the red statement, that's why.
Okay.
That's what I was hoping you would do.
Thank you for the recommendation.
Okay.
All right, good. I like it. It's shaping up. It still fits on one page, which is good. Our public campaign. We are very, very close. Lumi, who's our marketing branding sub-consultant, they are working on the website this week. Sharon just shared a bunch of great images to include on it. Sharon had quite a lot of back and forth with the people that control the city's website. And I think, pretty quickly figured out that the most user-friendly way of doing this was to manage the website ourselves, which means having our own domain that links from the city website and is designed to look just like the city website. So that's what we've done. We've obtained a URL, danburypoc.com, for the duration of the project. And we are very soon, definitely by our next meeting, we will be online with links from the website, and we will start we'll do a press release, and we'll really start this campaign. We have a lot of work to do still to build out our public engagement schedule. We've been feeling out, where things are at with COVID to try to get a sense for, how closely we can engage the public, and hopefully in person. And things are looking pretty favorable on that front. The governor is now allowing meetings of more than 100 people indoors. Whether or not that's a good idea anytime soon is another question. People are getting vaccinated, so I think we're hopeful about having some real meetings in the future. So we haven't rushed that part of it because things are continuing to evolve, but we do want to get started very soon.
Yeah, let me just interject for 1 second and just say, once we have the website and all in the link. So again, you would go to the city's website, you click on the page, it said POCD through the Department of Planning and Zoning, and there would be this link, and it would take you to a page, again, that looks just like you're on the city website, but through a different URL that Francisco and his team will manage through the process. Before we release that and the press release, I will send it to all of you so that you have the link yourselves, and you have a copy of what's of the press release.
I have a question.
Sure.
Will the statistics that you showed us today, which were very comprehensive and extremely interesting, will they be posted out on the website? And, you know, will that be soon or later if they are? And the reason I'm asking is I can just imagine there'd be a lot of interest in using that data, especially I'm thinking the, Western Connecticut, projects and classes, educational uses. But also businesses. So I don't know if that's going to be made available or not. So that's my question.
Yeah, I think our plan is, Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our plan is to make all presentations available on the website. It will act as a repository for all information. So you could probably barely see, there's a tab for documents and presentations, and we post everything to that, so it's available to people. And we can even, if we have something we're really excited about sharing, we can not just post it there and hope that someone finds it, but we could do a little blast about it and really call attention to it.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And we've been getting, as I've sent to you, all copies of the PowerPoints. We have them on, on our files at City Hall, and so we'll just upload them onto the proper section. So anybody could see whatever we've talked about and Francisco has presented over the last 3 months, they'll be able to see those PowerPoints as well. Very transparent. That's important.
I just want to add that it was Francisco, very good information gathering. That was a very interesting presentation. Even those of us who have been around town our whole lives learned something from that. So, but like you said, with a degree of humor, now what? We have all this great data. Now we just have to figure out what we're going to do with it. But it's good data, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Arnie. All right. Project schedule, and we're creeping along. We're right on schedule. Still in the discovery process, so I can hear already you're chomping on the bit for that now what or so what part, but I promise you we're going to get there. Well, let's talk about how we do that and our next steps. So, launch the public engagement campaign. We want to do that over the next month. We're next going to take a look at Danbury's neighborhoods. So I was talking, all these numbers were Danbury as a whole, right? But we know that Danbury is a lot of different smaller communities, neighborhoods. And we want to take a closer look at those neighborhoods to see how they compare. And as we drill down the neighborhood level, the data available to us changes a little bit. So our analysis would look a little bit different. And we're going to start to pay more attention or focus more on housing as we get to that level of assessment. So I think our meeting next month will have a lot of data for you. It'll include some more maps. You'll see more maps as part of that, and a lot more discussion about we need to get more information from you to better understand the neighborhoods is what it comes down to. So I think it's going to be more in give and take. So let's talk about that. Neighborhoods are interesting. Everyone has a different conception about where neighborhood boundaries are and what a neighborhood is or isn't. And you're divided up a little differently depending on what you consider a neighborhood. And for the purposes of the plan, we would like to identify about 5 or 6 geographies or puzzle pieces that make up the city. And we'll need some help with you, from you on that. So please, over the next month, think about, well, what are our neighborhoods? If you want to sketch up a map, whatever it is, you have a good map, please share it with us. Some of that is, when we take a look at data, is going to need to fall in line with zip codes or census tracts. But we want to get something that's pretty representative and looks familiar to people, and we could use your help in that. And it doesn't have to be done before our next meeting, but by the next meeting, if you can come prepared to give us some feedback on where should we draw the lines and what do we call the neighborhoods? It would be very helpful.
Yeah, I can also scan in the census tract map for Danbury. That might, or you can look at a ward map or something like that and start to think about it like that. Not into 25 different neighborhoods, because I think that would just be unwieldy, but generalized areas of the city, north and south of 84, east and west of Main Street, and then subdivided maybe a little bit more than that. But I think that's kind of a good framework. But Jen and I can send you some background maps to take a look at. That might be helpful.
I'd like to make a comment on what Sharon just said. The reference to the ward maps, being involved in that aspect of the city for a number of years. If you look at the city on a ward basis, the demographics are so widespread in a given ward. I mean, this is a political division, and I don't know if that it would have much applicability to what we're trying to do here.
Right. I mean, I agree. I was just trying to think of maps that I have that we could scan in. But I think the best thing, because it's on the census level, you'll be able to get block and track information is to get you the census tract map for the city of Danbury. And again, that's going to be a wide disparity as well, Joel, but at least you can break data down on that level.
Yeah.
Okay. One other thing. Could you flip back to the timeline chart about 3 slides back?
Yep.
There we go. Okay. All right. I thought something was happening that isn't happening. I thought our participation was dropping off before the plan development.
No,
it is not.
We're going to make you work the whole time. We're going monthly all the way to the end.
Okay. Very good. Thank you much.
All right. And as a reminder, our next meeting is Tuesday, April 20th at 4 o'clock.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for helping me get it done on time so I can do what I need to do.
Yeah, thanks, Francisco. That was really great. We understand that. I will thank you, everybody. We'll get information out. We'll send you this PowerPoint as well. So on that, unless anybody has a comment, I will take a motion to adjourn or a wave from somebody.
So moved.
Arnie, seconded by Perry. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks again.
Bye now.
Good presentation.